Hello students. Today let's discuss the course English and Daily Life. So in English and Daily Life, we are going to begin with the block 1, that is greetings and goodbyes. So under the greetings and goodbyes we have units. I'm going to cover unit 1 and 2. So let's start with the unit 1, starting and ending conversations. When we talk about starting and ending conversations, so we need to know what are the objectives to it. So let's begin with the objectives. 1, it is to begin and end conversations appropriately. So whenever the communications begin, so it is very important to begin and end conversations. Then the communication will be successful, right? So let's look at the second objective, which is to have a better understanding of the etiquette to be followed and expressions to be used, which are very important. For example, the body language, let's say, and then the mannerisms. So these are all suggest that how well do we present in front of others, right? So this is the second objective. And the third objective is to monitor your own speech more critically. Again, this is very important because what we are saying should be communicated really well to the others. Otherwise, the communication will be disgruntled, right? So these are the three objectives when we are making a conversation with other people that we need to keep in mind. So let's look at what is etiquette. Etiquette is a system of rules that tell you what is the polite way to behave towards other people. Etiquette is important for making interactions between people comfortable and avoiding unpleasant circumstances, right? So we have many etiquettes in our daily life that we follow. That if we meet elders, that we have different kinds of etiquettes that we follow, and then if we meet friends, we have certain etiquettes to follow. So we have various etiquettes. So let's look at the rules of etiquette. So there are many rules of etiquette while we make communication, but some of the rules of etiquette include: 1, good table manners. Let's say that someone invites over, for dining, and how do we make use of the cutleries which are kept in the table, right? How do we use spoons? How do we use forks and knives? So these are the very common etiquettes that we have to follow when we are dining with other people, and these are considered as good table manners. And the second, how to introduce one person to another. So we usually introduce one another in everyday basis. But there are certain rules, there are certain etiquettes that we follow while we introduce to one another, right? So we say it in a polite way, we introduce ourselves in a polite way. So the politeness itself is considered as an etiquette, right? And what is the third etiquette? How to hold appropriate conversation with people in various social settings, right? So this is very important. So usually, in offices or in college, that we have formal meetings with our superiors, with our bosses. How do we hold conversations? How do we make gestures to them, right? So these are some of the other basic etiquettes that we follow. And if we are with friends, let's say that we have gone to the restaurant, right? And there, how do we present ourselves to our friends, right? There are a whole lot of different etiquettes to follow, right? So these are like basic rules of etiquettes that we need to follow in everyday basis. And let's look at the origins of etiquette. So we all talk about, we are all talking about this etiquette, while dining, that how do we use cutleries, how do we present ourselves in front of other people. But where are these origins of etiquette? Why it is called as etiquette? So let's look at that. Let's discuss that. Some of the origins, let's discuss that now. Hundreds of years of knights in armor raised the visors of their helmets so that their faces could be seen. So this is the origin of one etiquette. And let's look at the practice. So we'll look at the origin now, and let's look at what is the practice that we are following today. A man tipping or lifting his hat as a polite greeting, usually to a woman. Especially this happens in the Western countries, right? A man lifting his hat as a polite greeting. Look at this. So the way practicing this, and the origin goes back to the Greek period, where the hundreds of knights, they raised the visors of their helmets so that their faces could be seen. Okay. So let's look at another origin of the etiquette. Long ago, men held out their empty hands to show that they were not holding daggers. Okay. So this is during the wartime that people used to held out. People used to, people used to show their hands to tell the people in front of them that we don't have daggers in our hands. And let's look at the practice for that. People shake hands. We all shake hands in everyday basis, right? So these people shaking hands is the practice that we are following today, and then this has become a greeting. So we use this as a everyday basis, right? We shake hands with people as a sign of greeting. But the origin goes back to the Greek period again. It has come from a very long period of time. There are such many interesting origins of the commonly followed etiquettes. These etiquettes make more sense when we know about the context in which they originated, right? So without context, that we do not really get to know that why we are using these etiquettes, right? So that is why we need to know the origin in order to know that why it is called as a good etiquette. Now we have looked at the etiquettes. Let's look at how to start a conversation. So when we are talking to a person in front of us, that we begin the conversation, let's look at how we start a conversation. Starting a conversation involves 4 steps. 1, greeting, that we greet to each other. The second, introducing oneself, that we always introduce ourselves when we start a conversation, and asking about other person's well-being. So that is the basic politeness that we follow, right? So we ask about the well-being of the other person. And the 4th, comprehension, that how we comprehend the conversation, right? So the questions like how are you and how have you been are routine courtesies, and responses to these depend upon the kind of relationship shared between the people involved in the conversation, right? So we ask the same question, but the response we get is different from people, right? For example, if we ask a stranger that how are you or how have you been, what is the response that we get? We get it in one line, right? So he or she might say that I'm good or I'm fine, right? And but it is different when we are asking our friends that how are you or how have you been, right? So when we are asking the friends, then we will get an elaborate answer. So that is why it completely depends on the kind of relationship that we share between the people involved in the conversation, right? So it can be like one short answer, or it can go to 15-minute answer, right? So usually it is only within close intimate circles that people feel more comfortable answering these questions and share detailed updates of their lives. So we just discussed about it, right? It's only within the close intimate circles, when we know the person really well, only the person can open up about himself or herself. If the person is not intimate enough, then the person is not comfortable to open up with others, right? And the very basic and important part of conversation, that is listening, right? So we usually have this preconceived notion or expectation of what we are going to hear. So while we listen, so we already know what the person, what our friend might ask. So we already have this preconceived notion, and then we are ready with the answer, right? So these expectations are associated with the purpose of listening. This makes it possible for the listener to understand. So we have this purpose of listening, so we already have certain preconceived notions, and then when the person asks the question, that we immediately respond, right? So thus the following are closely related in the process of listening. So these are the important elements that is there in the process of listening. The first that becomes important is a listener, one who listens, expectation, that the expectation of what the other person might say, and the purpose of the conversation, so it varies, and the comprehension, that how we comprehend holistically the listening, the conversation, right? So it all depends on this, the process of listening. Listening is an essential component in the process of holding conversations. Right? Listening, as we already said, that it's an essential component of the process of holding conversations, because if we do not listen to other people, then we are not able to answer in a comprehensive way. Now look at some of the formal and informal expressions. So we always, while we have a communication, that we always use certain phrases, and it completely depends on who the person that we are responding to. If we are responding it to our boss, if we are responding it to a teacher, we always use a formal language to respond. But if we are responding it with our friends, it is a very different scenario where we use informal expressions to communicate what we want to say. Right? So let's look at some of the expressions. The different expressions are used during a conversation depending upon the relationship between the people involved in it. Right? So as I said, that when it's a teacher or when it is a boss, it's a different kind of expressions that we use. But if there are friends, then it's a very different kind of expressions that we use. That's the second point. When we are conversing with our friends or relatives of similar age group, we use informal expressions. Right? And whereas at institutional spaces like office, college or university, or with the people whom we do not share very close relation, we use formal expressions. Right? And yeah, that is also true, right? It need not to be elders, or it need not to be people who are superior to us, but even with the people who we do not know, we tend to start a conversation in a formal way, right? We do not we do not start off by saying, hey, how are you doing? We do not say that, right? So we usually use the formal expressions to convey to the person whom we meet first. And use of the correct expressions determines the effectiveness of the conversations, right? So it's always the correct expressions that determines the effectiveness of the conversation. It's always if there is a teacher, if there are elders, then if we use formal expressions, that is relevant to our conversation. But if we use informal expressions during that time, then the conversations won't be as good as when we use the formal expressions. Let's look at some of the formal and informal expressions. The formal expression, good morning, what a pleasant surprise. And let's look at the informal expressions for that, oh hi, right? And another formal expression would be, good evening, Miss Rita, how do you do? And informal expressions is, hello Rita. And the formal expression, let's look at another example, this is indeed a good stroke of luck. And informal expressions, what do we say? Lucky fellow, right? So we use it with our friends like this. Let's look at one more example. Would we all maintain a moment's silence, please? This usually happens, when there is a talk going on, right? And informal expressions, keep quiet, right? Let's say, when our friend in a restaurant is talking too much, what we say, just keep quiet, right? So this is the informal expressions that we use, right? So these are some of the formal and informal expressions that we use on our daily basis. And what are contractions in informal expressions? So we looked at the formal expression, and what are the contractions in informal expressions? In conversations or informal writings, we use contractions. For instance, instead of writing I am, we can use I am, that is I apostrophe M, right? So these are I apostrophe um, this we can use it as an informal expression, right? So let's look at few examples to make sense of the contractions in informal expressions. Let's give an example of without contraction. For example, we are all very busy, right? So with contractions, how do we say we are all very busy? That we, W-E apostrophe R-E, right? So this is the contraction that we have used in a sentence. Another example to make sense of the contractions and without contractions, I cannot go today, right? And what would be the conversation with contraction? I can't go today, right? So there, CAN apostrophe T, we use the contraction there, right? In this sentence. These are the contractions in informal expressions that we need to be aware of. We usually use this while we are writing. Of course, when we are speaking, that we do not really get to know whether we use contractions or not, but when we write, that it is very evident that we use contractions or not. And ending a conversation. In a conversation, farewells and goodbyes are as important as greetings, right? So in farewells and in conversation, farewells and goodbyes are as important as greetings, because only then the communication is complete. We need to use appropriate expressions to signal the end of a conversation. For example, making apologies for citing a reason for leaving. So, because when somebody is talking, we do not just abruptly leave the hall, right? So, when we have to leave, then we will apologize, we will excuse ourselves, saying that, I have a train at 5:30 that I have to leave, or I have a meeting and I have to leave. So we make apologies, we cite a reason for leaving the room, leaving the hall, right? That is how we end the conversation. Our body language and gestures may also suggest the closing of a conversation. That is very important. The body language, that if we are running late, then we're all very shaky, right? So we don't make eye contact. We think of something else. We do not really listen to the conversation. So these are the body language and gestures that suggest that we have to end this conversation because we are getting late, right? So a parting salutation finally ends the conversation. So this is a very good way to end the conversation, that is a parting salutation, right? For example, there are some common formal and informal parting salutations. Let's look at that. For example, goodbye, take care, have a nice weekend ahead, see you soon, my friend, good night, see you soon. So these are some of the salutations, some of the parting salutation that we make, when we are leaving. So these are some of the things that we say, right? Now let's this is the end of the unit 1, and now let's look at the unit 2, that is social small talk. Okay, what are the objectives of the social small talk? 1, it is to initiate and sustain a conversation, right? So we need to sustain it. So we've looked at how we begin our conversation and how we end our conversation, but we haven't really looked at the process of conversation, right? So to initiate and sustain a conversation is the objective of the social small talk, right? And to pick and or avoid topic depending on the degree of intimacy with the interlocutor. Again, we have discussed about it. It's like how well we know the person. It depends on the person that we choose the topic that we want to discuss. That we do not discuss a topic with a stranger. We do not discuss anything deep topic with a stranger, right? So we make small talks, but only with the person we know that we go deeper and we tend to have a good conversation. To evaluate the impact of our own and other people's small talk. So this is again important, right? So to evaluate the impact of our own and other people's small talk. So we always evaluate like how the person speak, and what the person is speaking. So we always evaluate the person's talk as well as our own talk as well. So we are aware of the words that we are speaking. So we are very conscious about the words that we speak And the fourth, to use appropriate language and expressions. Again, it is important we looked at how we use formal expressions and informal expressions, but it is also important to use appropriate language in order to express ourselves. Let's look at what is small talk. We looked at the small talk, but what is small talk exactly? Small talk is casual conversation between acquaintances or people who we meet in different social and professional settings. It's like an icebreaker that may lead to more intimate conversations later. Right? It's a casual conversation between acquaintances or people whom we meet. We meet for the first time. When we meet for the first time, that we tend to have conversations, we tend to have lighter conversations, and we don't really know where to begin with. So that is why we have something called icebreaker. That we ask that you're wearing a nice shirt. We say that you're wearing a nice shirt, right? So this is an icebreaker. So that helps the other person to be comfortable with us, right? So it is like an icebreaker that may lead to more intimate conversations later. Right? So you can discuss about the things that you like. You can discuss about the food you like. So it depends. It totally depends on the person who is starting the conversation. But the icebreakers are very important to sustain the conversation, to get the conversation for a long time. Right? And the main idea of small talk is to have a comfortable conversation, and thus it is important to avoid any topic that might lead to unpleasantness, right? So this is very important. This is another very important etiquette that we need to keep in our mind, that when we are having a conversation with the person, that we need to know that what makes the person comfortable, and uncomfortable as well. So sometimes we might not be aware of a language that might make the person who is standing next to us make uncomfortable. So we always need to make sure that we avoid this unpleasantness that can occur in the conversation by using the unpleasant words. So we need to avoid that as much as we can. Often the topics of small talk are taken from the immediate surroundings, like weather, meals, places, etc. Such conversation often lead to other contextual topics. It always happens with our friends, right? So we talk, let's say that we discuss about food, let's say that you say, what we do is that we usually start our conversation. We don't expect the other person to start a conversation. So that is why instead of waiting for others, we need to take a charge of starting a conversation with an icebreaker, with a casual hello, or whatever it is. We may do so by asking simple general questions about their well-being. Yes, this also can be possible, right? Like, how have you been? How have you been these days? Right? So these are very general questions that might lead the other person get comfortable. Okay. So while we are holding small talks, it is important to be engaged and pay attention to what the other person is saying, even if the content is not directly relevant to us. Right? So we already, let's say that we have already begun our conversation, and that person gets comfortable, the person who is standing next to us gets comfortable with it, and then he or she wants to share other things that we might not be interested, but that we have started the conversation. It is our duty to listen to what the other person is saying, right? The content may not be directly relevant to what we are speaking, but listening, that we looked at how important the component of listening is during the conversation. So we just have to listen, that is the essential component of the small talk as well. And the next point is very important, that we should talk less and listen carefully to what the other person has to say. Right? So we always have to talk less and listen carefully to what the other person has to say. Okay. Self-praising or bragging should be avoided during small talks. Right? So we always tend to do this, right? So we always tend to talk about our achievements, but we need to avoid as much as we can, because we should not make the other person feel smaller. Okay? So we should avoid talking about our achievements and accolades as much as possible. We should constantly be mindful of what we are saying and the questions that we are asking to ensure that the other person is not feeling uncomfortable. So this is very important. We should be always aware, we should be always mindful of the conversation that we are having and the language that we are using in front of the other person. We should be observant of their gestures and body language for signs of discomfort. That we always need to be observant, if the person is getting uncomfortable or not. And asking questions. While holding small talk, we often ask questions to begin or take the conversation forward. Right? So we always tend to ask, if we do not understand, we ask, could you repeat what you're saying? So we always ask questions, or we always ask that how is your parents doing? Anything that can lead to, that can lead the conversation further. However, we need to be careful to not ask personal questions if we do not share close relation with the people involved that we have already discussed. Questions can be general and not intrusive. So the question always can be general, but it should not hurt the other person. They can be open or close-ended questions. For example, in a close-ended question, the number of possible responses is limited, like yes or no. But in an open-ended question, the responses can be varied and long. Let's look at some of the close-ended questions and open-ended questions. In open-ended questions, we asked, are you still feeling unwell? So this can go on and on. The other person can open up about how the person is feeling, and the other person can carry on with the conversation, right? So that's why these are called open-ended questions. And what are the close-ended questions? What was your experience in the trip? Or would you want to share with us a pleasant childhood memory? So here, the answer would be just yes or no, and the conversation just ends, right? So that is why it is called close-ended questions. In open-ended questions, that we tend to go on and on in our conversation, and during the close-ended questions, that we just end our conversation quickly, right? Open-ended questions, they allow the space to person we are having a small talk with to disclose as much information as they want, right? So let's look at, let's look at how the close-ended questions work. Often close-ended questions lead to a definitive answer, and therefore the conversation tends to fade with nothing more to add. However, if we add an open-ended conversation or open-ended question after that, we give the person a chance to elaborate or talk more. Okay, let's look at the instance. Person 1, did you enjoy your trip? Person 2, oh yes, we had fun. This is a close-ended question, and the conversation could fade from here, right? But open-ended questions will be like this. That's amazing. What did you spend? How did you spend your days there? So this allows the person to share more about their experiences. And we've already discussed how the body language that matters. While holding small talks, we should always be careful of our gestures and body expressions to display an interest in the conversation. We should stand facing the person we are talking to and maintain eye contact. The eye contact, which is very important during conversation. We should avoid pointing or swinging our legs, fiddling with small things around us like jewelry, etc. This is again the etiquette that we need to follow when we are having a conversation with other person, right? So let's sum up the units that we discussed, the unit 1 and 2, that we discussed about etiquettes and how holding appropriate conversations is an essential part of it. We talked about how we can start a conversation and important role that listening plays during the conversation. Further, we explored how we can use formal and informal expressions depending upon the type of conversations we are engaged in, and we also discussed how to end conversations politely. We then moved on to discussion of small talk, right? What is it? And what are things that we should keep in mind while holding small talks? We looked at the kind of questions that we can ask and how to be mindful of the body language while we are engaging in such conversation, so as to ensure a comfortable and pleasant experience for all, right? So we need to be very conscious of the body language that we are using while making a conversation. Okay, so let's end this discussion with this. Thank you so much.